I'm Steve Schwinn. I teach constitutional law at the University of Illinois, Chicago. This week, the Supreme Court issued a huge decision for LGBTQ rights in the workplace. The Supreme Court said that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 bans discrimination in the workplace because of sexual orientation and transgender status. This means that employers across the country can no longer discriminate against individuals because they're gay or because they're transgender. This was a 6-3 ruling. It was authored by Justice Gorsuch, who was President Trump's first appointee to the Supreme Court, and it's described as the triumph of textualism. That's because Justice Gorsuch relies on the text of Title VII in interpreting it to protect against discrimination by sexual orientation and transgender status. I thought we'd take a look. These were 3 consolidated cases. In 2 of the cases, the employees were fired because they were gay. In 1 of the cases, the employee was fired because they were transsexual. Each of the employees brought a claim in federal court under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VII bans discrimination in the workplace because of sex. And so the question for the court was, does that language because of sex encompass discrimination by sexual orientation and transgender status? The court said that that language, because of sex, because of, means but for causation. That means that sex has to be a contributing factor in the adverse employment action, but not the only factor in the adverse employment action. As long as the employer made the decision because of sex, but also with some other reasons, that's enough for a Title VII violation. In this context, what the court said is, if the employer dismissed an employee because of sex, but also because of the employee's sexual orientation or transgender status, that's a violation of Title VII. As to that language because of sex, what does sex mean? Well, the court said that this was really easy. Take the situation where an employer fires a male employee for being attracted to a man, but the employer doesn't fire a female employee for being attracted to that very same man. The court said that's the very definition of sex discrimination. In the context of transgender status, consider a situation where an employer fires a man for presenting as a woman, but doesn't similarly fire a woman for presenting as a woman. Again, the very definition of different treatment by sex, that is, discrimination by sex. What the court said is, this is actually pretty easy. Sex discrimination is part and parcel of sexual orientation discrimination and transgender status discrimination. Then the court said that Title VII is concerned about individualized discrimination on a case-by-case basis, not group-wide discrimination. What this means is that it's no answer for an offending employer that the employer would have fired a woman for being attracted to a woman just as quickly as it would have fired a man for being attracted to a man. What the court said is that doesn't really matter. What we need to look at in particular is whether the employer fired the man for being attracted to a man. That's what matters under Title VII. The court said that when we take these things together, we take the but for causation under the because of sex. We take sex to be part and parcel of discrimination by sexual orientation and transgender status. And we understand that Title VII is concerned about individualized discrimination, not group-wide discrimination. Then we come out with the answer that Title VII's because of sex also includes discrimination by sexual orientation and transgender status. And Title VII, therefore, prohibits discrimination by sexual orientation and transgender status. Justice Alito dissented, joined by Justice Thomas, and then Justice Kavanaugh wrote a separate dissent, making very similar kinds of points. What Justice Alito wrote was, as a matter of text, sexual orientation and transgender status are different than sex discrimination. What he said was, if an employer fired a man for being attracted to a man, but also fired a woman for being attracted to a woman, but didn't fire a man for being attracted to a woman or a woman for being attracted to a man, he said, well, that's the definition of sexual orientation discrimination, not sex discrimination. Moreover, Justice Alito said that back in 1964, when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VII, nobody understood that this language, because of sex, would encompass sexual orientation and transgender status discrimination. And he said because nobody understood it that way back then, nobody should interpret it that way today. He said, this is an exercise in legislation. The court really is legislating here, which is the role of Congress, not the court. What does all this mean? Well, first and foremost, it means that employers across the country cannot discriminate by sexual orientation or transgender status. Does this go beyond the employment context? Well, maybe. That depends. If a federal civil rights statute prohibits discrimination against individuals because of sex, the courts are going to interpret that language in exactly the same way that the court interpreted the language in these cases and say that yes, because of sex includes sexual orientation and transgender status discrimination. Justice Alito, in dissent, even went a step further, and he said that this decision might have a kind of gravitational pull on the court's constitutional equal protection analysis. What that might mean is that discrimination by sexual orientation and discrimination by transgender status, now there's a good reason to argue that those get heightened review under the court's equal protection doctrine. Now, there's one other thing that we might see in response to today's ruling. Many are saying that we're likely to see employers make claims that Title VII, by banning discrimination by sexual orientation and transgender status, that now interferes with their free exercise of religion or statutory religion rights. So we'll have to see how those cases play out and whether those cases get any traction in the courts. I hope this has been helpful. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much.